You're listening to the Podcast Detroit Network. Visit www.podcastdetroit.com for more information.
Welcome to Smart Sex, Smart Love, where talking about sex goes beyond the taboos and talking about love goes beyond the honeymoon. I'm Dr. Joe Court. Thanks for tuning in.
Hello and welcome to Smart Sex, Smart Love. Thank you for tuning in. And if this is your first time listening to my show, welcome. Today I'm joined by licensed marriage and family therapist and ASEX certified sex therapist, Eleni Economides. Eleni is located in Rochester, New York, where her work focuses on helping her clients' concerns around sexuality and relationships. On this episode, we'll be discussing how to talk to your teenagers about masturbation. As Eleni says, masturbation is a healthy milestone for our teens and is a very normal part of our sexual development. Teaching them to do it right as an act of self-love, body awareness, and self-soothing is a gift that will serve them for life. I couldn't agree more. Welcome, Eleni.
Hi, Joe. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on here. I'm so excited for to talk to us about. Now, this isn't going to run in May, but May is Masturbation Month. I'm sure you know that, right?
That's correct. That is correct.
Yeah. And that's why we booked you, but I think this is going to be on after. But Either way, it's an important conversation because talking to your kids about sex in general, people don't have words, people don't know how to do it. And then talking to your teenagers about masturbation, same thing. So why don't you start with why talk to your teenagers about masturbation? Let's go there first.
Well, I guess a lot of people really underestimate the influence that they have on their children. They think that school is, the place that they're going to get their sex education, and teachers or somehow a sex educator will be the better person to, talk about anatomy and all the things that they need to know about reproduction and birth control and STDs, STIs, which is what the majority of sex education in the United States focuses on. Hopefully, not all states are required to provide accurate information, and that's a little troublesome. But at least the ones that they do, the sex education focuses on those topics: reproduction and STI, STD prevention, and pregnancy prevention. Nobody really talks about pleasure, which is the major ingredient for why somebody masturbates.
Exactly.
Curiosity and pleasure is the curiosity. Kids discover that it feels good very early on. And by the time they're teenagers, they have had to either figure out a lot of it by themselves. I guess what I'm trying to say is that the best ways to kind of start these conversations early on and build on them. It's more like of a scaffolding process where you have sort of micro lessons and micro teachings. You talk to them about the birds and the bees, and then those discussions evolves as they should, as their understanding becomes more complicated and they're able to process more complicated concepts. So ideally, those discussions have started earlier, but if teenage years is when you start, let that be it. Don't underestimate your influence, and you are the best person for your child to learn this information rather than go online and through friends, because there is a lot of misinformation out there.
Right. And you want them to, your children to have your family values, whatever those are. And so that's the trouble, right? Is that they don't do it and then they learn it elsewhere. And then they're upset that it was learned elsewhere, but they didn't step in to teach their children. Correct.
Right. That, now, this is a little bit of a tricky topic there that you started, Joe, because you want them to have your own, to come from a place of family values and, certain principles that you have as a parent and an adult. But at the same time, it's important that you are aware of your own biases before you talk to them. meaning some of us have had traumatic sexual experiences growing up. Some of us come from a religious or more of a conservative background. I guess, what is it that you want them to understand? Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, you're saying you don't want them to pass on misinformation or biased
Correct.
information, right, based on their lack of knowledge and awareness.
Correct. If a parent is very hesitant in talking about these things because they understand that they themselves have limitations and they feel, there's a certain amount of discomfort around, gosh, how can I talk to my kid about this? I don't know myself. I don't want to, give them false information. There's nothing wrong in acknowledging that you feel uncomfortable and that you're out of your element. But don't fake comfort. Kids, teenagers can sort of, they smell bullshit. They don't, they know when you don't feel comfortable, and they're not going to come to you. If they don't think that you're the person they can go to. It's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say, let's research that together. It's better to do that than to try and lie or manipulate your way to kind of, what you're sharing.
Right. It's okay not to know. When I did a seminar last year on talking to kids about sex. I tried to get a community going in my practice in Royal Oak, and I was bringing in groups of people just from volunteering to talk about it, And what I learned was parents have difficulties talking to their children because they weren't talked to when they were children, so they don't have the language. Have you seen that?
Yes, for sure. They do. They don't have the language, and they have the same, oftentimes, misinformation or limited, let's call it, information as to how do I talk to my kid when I had to go through what I had to go through to learn the hard way. How can we either become overprotective, right? I don't want them to know or engage in any of that in hopes that they're going to stay safe and they're not going to go through what I went through. Or the issue that you just discussed comes up where I don't know how to do this. And maybe, their father or their mother, whoever, the other caregiver can do the hard work. I leave it up to them. I guess we try to either limit the information or abstain from, just hope that somebody else is going to do it. And we won't have to do it.
I'm just thinking when I'm listening to you and reading over, the notes before we got on, that I could just see the trouble and the discomfort that parents would have talking to their kids, teens, whatever, about masturbation being pleasure, self-love, self-soothing, and then on top of it, a safe alternative to partnered sex. What do you say to parents that say, what do you mean that maybe they don't believe in that? And maybe they feel like they're going to be encouraging all kinds of acting out behaviors in their kids.
Correct. A lot of people do think that if I start this talk, I'm going to encourage my kid to be sexual. And that is further from the truth. When children are curious and they're going to, discover their body or start experimenting with what feels good from a very young age. And that can be very confusing to them when they don't know why that's happening. And if the parent is sort of trying to, a lot of parents, I guess, end up shaming. I'm trying to stay away from the word because I don't want to, guilt trip anyone. But it's easy for us to kind of say, don't touch yourself there. This is, it's not right to touch yourself that way. But we don't explain why. We don't talk about the concept of, this is pleasurable and that's why you do it. And that's okay because it feels good. But at the same time, it's something that you do in private. And you can have your own space, that you can do that in the right time. And that is not in public, where a lot of... Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
a lot of younger kids will touch themselves, and there is exploration between children. People are scared. They don't know what to make of, the fact that a child is curious, and they're afraid that if they talk about it, that it's going to make the child more sexual, that is not correct.
One time, this was Oprah Winfrey, in the last 2 or 3 of her seasons on her regular show, she had a sex therapist, Laura Berman. I don't know if you remember this or not. I love Dr. Laura Berman. And she had really good input. And they did one show on masturbation and vibrators. Well, maybe it's just on vibrators. Well, obviously masturbation. And Laura Berman said she recommends gifting your 13 or 12-year-old daughters vibrators so they can learn how to manage their bodies. Because if they don't, then when they get together with boys, they're in service of the male body and they don't know how to help the boy teach them how to manage her body. And I remember the audience reaction was very negative. And Gail, Oprah's best friend Gail, was the first caller in and was mortified that this was the show and mortified that Laura Berman was recommending this. And all the reviews after that were so negative. And I remember being shocked. What do you make of that?
Well,
when I say shocked, I mean shocked at the negative feedback, not shocked that Laura said that. I thought it was very progressive. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, it kind of, I think it's a parallel of what we were talking about, the fear of what is going to, there is this also coming from a patriarchal society where, there's still a lot of misogynism going around, and female pleasure, it's still a taboo to recommend something like that on a show that has so much publicity. I can understand that people were shocked to how open and I guess inviting this person might have been to tell people, give this to your daughter. You will give her a gift that will serve her well. But at the same time, I mean, I don't know that I agree with that recommendation per se, because I find that getting a vibrator is a very, very personal decision and a choice that one should make for themselves. But certainly being open to tell your daughter that, there's these things that are called vibrators, that they're intended for you to discover, and to help you figure out your body. Would you be interested in one? That would be certainly something that I would vote for.
Now, what about, I don't know if this is an area of that it's part of your expertise, but religious families that forbid masturbation. I mean, I'll tell you, I've had males in my office not be able to stay erect and have intercourse because they were taught not to masturbate or touch themselves, really. And so they learn to masturbate through pillows or the mattress. So that's the only way they can be sexual. So it's really put them in a bad position. That's why they come to therapy, to learn how not to stop masturbating, but do it differently so that they can enter, into intercourse. What do you tell religious people about the masturbation?
Well, in trying to be respectful of their, spiritual and religious beliefs, I think education is key. And that's the way that I approach it. I kind of talk about the limitations of, I guess how dangerous it is to not have accurate information, and in trying to be respectful of the principle that they're coming from, to help them see that there is a lot of dissonance in it, in that you are required to be a non-sexual person before marriage, and then after marriage, especially for females, but you mentioned males as well, you're supposed to kind of, procreate and be this everything, each other's sexual partner for life. And people just don't have the skills or the knowledge of their own body and what it is that they should be doing. And, people that come from such conservative backgrounds, they also have very limited access to technology, and which would be a way that they would educate themselves. Now, unfortunately, sometimes for some people that only happens through porn, which can be very misleading. But I certainly have encountered couples and clients that struggle with a lot of shame and a lot of guilt with wanting to, to be sexual in all sorts of ways, because pleasure, pleasure through sex is such a major, component of our life that sort of becomes suppressed, and it sort of sometimes leaks out in other areas. People, once they figure out that masturbation and releases certain kind of substances in their body and they feel great, it's easy to start using that as a way to soothe anxiety. And people can run into all sorts of issues if they don't have correct information and they feel shamed about what's happening.
I'm glad you brought up porn, because I think that's another issue is, where does porn fit in, and how do you talk to parents about talking to their children about pornography? Because I always tell people, your kids are watching it, whether you ban it, whether you limit it, whether you put parental controls on it, whether you scare them, they're going to do it. And, and so it's so important to have a porn literacy conversation so that they don't begin to think this is normal and this is what everybody's doing, when in fact much of porn isn't. So how do you help parents with that?
I guess like I said, there is no I don't think there is one age to start the talks, but at the same time, as kids are getting older and they have more and more access to technology and they have their own devices, the way that I kind of discuss this with parents, usually parents or other caregivers, in a kind of casual way, where I either suggest that they use their own experience, where, I was online and something popped up with sexual content, and I was wondering if you have seen something like that while you were online. Have you ever had this happen to you? Just if it has, let me know if you have any questions. I guess using one's own experience to say, I have been online and I saw things that surprised me, whether I searched for it or not. Sometimes sexual things pop up, right? You think you're looking for a video that has music, and all of a sudden something else pops up.
Yeah.
So just an open way of, you may have seen some pictures or videos online that are of naked people or sex. This is called porn. It depends on the age of the child, right? If it is an 8 or a 10-year-old, I think it's important to explain what porn is. Pictures of naked people having sex or, touching each other. And that can be confusing. Have you seen anything like this before? I want to talk with you openly so that you have the correct information. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me.
I love it. That's I think parents do need a script. I think because they weren't talked to about it, they don't have the language. It is uncomfortable. And if there is something like what you just said available to them, where can they go to learn about how to talk to children about sex?
Oh, there are some great resources out there. There is, are you talking about, specific like websites, for example, that people can go and educate? Yep. There are amaze.org, amaze, AMAZE. I think you'll perhaps will talk about the resources again. .org is a great website, scarletteen.com, sexpositivefamilies.com. Those are the 3 major resources that I use to refer parents that are interested in knowing more about how to talk to their teens about masturbation or anything else. But also, these are great websites for teens to go to. So
and go ahead.
So if a parent is, really determined not to have the conversations themselves, these are great places to refer your teen to so that they can get the information that they want.
What I love about scarletteen.com is that it's all different ages, all different orientations of sexuality, all different gender identities, some stuff for parents, some stuff for teens, for kids. It's so all inclusive that everybody could benefit from it.
That's right. That's right. And that is the beauty of it, because when kids get their information from porn, it has pretty untrue standards of what a person's body looks like. There's no inclusion of diverse bodies, and people can really start making associations of, well, I don't look like that, and what does that mean? But having a resource where it's all inclusive and one can find the place to identify and the group that they belong to is crucial, especially at that age, right? Teenagers, the most important thing for them is the feeling of belonging in a group, in a friends group that they can identify with.
Yes. And I'll tell you what I think is so important about this too is we forget, we're not even thinking about the fact that when you have healthy conversations around sexual health and masturbation, then these young people will grow up to have sexual health and healthy conversations with their partners, which when I see heterosexual couples, mixed sex couples, male-female couples, they have not talked about masturbation. They stumble on it years into the marriage. They have either keeping it a secret or they didn't think it was important to talk about. One or both of them feels betrayed. I've actually had women very jealous and feel like an infidelity response to finding her husband's porn, as if he's cheating on her. And I've had men be very competitive and upset that she's using a vibrator when she has access to his penis 24/7. I've had men actually say this in my office. So when you said like vibrators can be the patriarchal standards is you're taking sex away from men, that still goes on in a lot of the men's minds. But what we don't, right?
For sure.
Right. And we don't think about the fact that teaching these kids will help them as couples growing up. Gay and lesbian couples do not have this issue. They talk about gay guys talk about masturbation in their ads. How often, like before we've even met, this is what I do. It's how I jerk off. I use my left hand on Friday nights, my right hand, it's like no big deal. But with straight couples, it's such a thing because there's so much shame and lack of conversation. Have you seen that in your practice?
Multiple times, Joe, very much so. And both sides are true, where a man feels threatened by their female partner's use of a vibrator, or, how often does she masturbate and why does she masturbate? It creates a lot of anxiety. Heterosexual couples have this, let's call it, it seems like there is less differentiation. There's more of an enmeshment, and kind of they get their validation about their sexual, performance from their partner more than, other couples, it seems. And I encounter this issue very often where pornography becomes this mistress. And it's very hard for female partners to understand or even consider that this is just visual imagery that their partner uses to masturbate and have an orgasm that they have every right to have an act of self-love and pleasure with themselves. But it seems that it becomes, I cannot find the word, it's possessive of each other's sexuality in a heterosexual relationship, much more than other arrangements.
You say also, a healthy relationship with pleasure cannot coexist with shame. Pleasure is innate. It's available to us through all of our senses until our last breath. It does not have to be earned. Wow. Can you expand on that? That's really well said.
Well, I think, the concept of shame, the belief that we're flawed or unworthy of acceptance or belonging, it's sort of, it can be created early on with, like I said, not understanding, for example, why a child might be curious and touching themselves and shaming them in that way. It creates this kind of, oh my gosh, I did something wrong. I'm not being good. And it thrives in silence. People, stay quiet, and they never kind of once somebody is being shamed, they don't ask questions. Well, why? Why did you say that? Why should I not touch myself? So it becomes this much bigger thing mentally than it actually, could be in real life.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, it's. I think it's pleasure is a very, like, it's a human, a basic right, and not understanding it as such or as something that has to be earned. I think it's also a big in the American culture. I find this is more of an issue than I come from Greece, Europe.
Yeah.
And people can have pleasure, siestas, or resting is it's celebrated. In here, I find that people are much more driven in it from a kind of like, you have to produce all the time. If you rest and you enjoy what you have, it's kind of you're being lazy. I think there is more of a mentality that pleasure is, for the selfish, and you shouldn't engage in it unless you've earned it.
Really awful.
Isn't it?
Yes, it really is. We're getting close to the end. What final things do you want everyone to hear that is important in the work you do around masturbation and talking to teens?
I guess I'm going to go back to how we started, that don't underestimate your influence, that your children want to hear from you. They look up to the parents for resources and information, and don't be afraid to be the one that is going to guide them and lead them to, take care of themselves, trust their judgment, prepare them for independent decision-making rather than instilling fear and messages to scare them. It's important that we raise children that have critical thinking. And when we talk about porn, we also want to have critical thinking. Who created this? Why did they make it? What is the message? For who is the message? That's the amount of detail that one can talk about to help our teenagers thrive.
That's great. I love that. That's a really good way to end. I really, really appreciate it. Eleni.
Yeah.
How can people find you on the internet if they want to talk further with you?
Through my website, and that is betterrelationship.org.
All right. Great. All right. Well, thank you so much. It's very informative. I want to thank you, and I want to thank you for being on the show, and to thank everyone else for listening, and to not forget to follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Dr. Joe Kort, DrJoeKort. And please rate, review, and subscribe to my podcast. And I'll see you next time. Stay healthy and stay safe.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Smart Sex, Smart Love. I'm Dr. Joe Kort, and you can find me on joekort.com. That's JoeKort.com. See you next time.